He was one of the last pillars of that generation of leaders from Iran's 1979 revolution that was still in the high halls of power. Now, the sudden death of a heart attack at 82 of former President Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani could perhaps tip the balance between hardliners and moderates. Moderates like the current president, Hassan Rouhani, who counted on Rafsanjani for support. We're going to be asking our panel about the life and times of Rafsanjani, a man who wasn't afraid to publicly air his differences with the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and who shrugged off the pressure of hardliners. For instance, keeping the dialogue going with arch rivals Saudi Arabia. How does it bode for Rouhani 4 months ahead of his re-election bid? He faces hawks at home, in the region, and in Washington, where the man who's to be sworn in as President of the United States on Friday, Donald Trump, said on the campaign trail how he wants to tear up the Iran nuclear deal. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Iran after Rafsanjani. With us from Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, who teaches political science at the University of Tehran. Thank you for joining us. From Washington, Reza Marashi, Research Director at the National Iranian American Council. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Also in the U.S. Capitol, Nick Kozar, who a cartoonist for the Cartoonist Rights Network and also a human rights activist. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you.
And here in the studio, journalist Nushabeh Amiri. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. He was born into a family of wealthy pistachio farmers. Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani studied theology with Ayatollah Khamenei. The rest, as they say, is history. Rafsanjani would be devoted, going to jail, raising money, forging alliances. Kyle Brown has more.
For decades, Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani was at the center of Iranian political life, before and after serving as president in the 1990s. He was a founding member of Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution, a relative moderate in the turbulent years following the overthrow of the US-backed Shah. In the ensuing years, he pressed for a more pragmatic foreign policy in which the US was no longer seen as the arch-enemy. Iran's war with Iraq throughout the 1980s took its toll. His was among the voices calling on the leadership to sign the peace deal to spare the economy from ruin. While president from 1989 to 1997, he allowed some freedoms, such as in Iran's film and media industry. But he concentrated on the country's economic reconstruction, supporting new development projects from shopping malls to high-rises. But corruption allegations cost him his later bid for the presidency in 2005, when he lost to Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Rafsanjani was criticized when he supported the opposition Green movement in 2009. And he was blocked from the 2013 ballot by the country's hardliners. Still, he continued to wield some influence as an advisor to reformist politicians. And until his death, he was the head of Iran's Expediency Council, an influential body that mediates between the parliament and the Guardian Council. His death will deal a blow to the centrist president, Hassan Rouhani, who hopes to secure a second term in the face of resistance from hardliners.
Mohammad Marandi, if there's an anecdote that sums up Rafsanjani, what would it be?
I think he would be considered to be one of the most intelligent politicians of our era, well-informed, well-educated, and a strong manager.
Give me an example.
Well, during his presidency, he was able to rebuild the country's infrastructure, or actually build the country's infrastructure, because during the war the government was not very able to create a strong infrastructure for the country. And before the revolution, not much was done outside of the major cities. So during the 8 years that he was president, he was successful in developing the the roads that were in the past non-existent, healthcare centers, schools, telephone networks, these things that in areas of the country had never existed. The pace of growth in the country during that period, I think, was unprecedented, and subsequently, I think the rate of that in which the infrastructure was developed slowed down.
Michele Amiri, when did you first hear of Rafsanjani?
When I was in Neufchâteau with Ayatollah Khamenei.
When he was in exile here in France?
Yeah, it was the beginning of Iranian revolution, and Khamenei has moved to France. And then I heard about Rafsanjani.
And what was his reputation? What?
At that time, in fact, he was a revolutionary, Islamic revolutionary. The reputation that you're talking about is coming afterwards, when he was in power and he was involved in politics.
How would you describe him? You just heard the description of Mohamed Morandi as somebody who we can associate with economic growth. Is that how you remember him?
Yes and no. But, you know, we are talking about the politics and politician. So all the things that we can say about Rafsanjani can be said about any other politician. But I can say that he was pragmatic. He was very politician and teacher, and because he was in fact pro-Western country, and he wanted to have relationship with the Western country. So he tried to do the thing which changes at least the appearance of the country, and that's why his period is called the period of constructing the country, and he is called the general of construction.
Nick Kozar, how will you remember him?
Let me show you something. I remember him as the Godfather. Somebody who was loved by lobbyists and had so many people on his payroll. And I believe that he was somebody that, for the sake of his own interest and to be remembered as the general of construction, he ran the most unsustainable development in the country. Now that we have a water crisis in Iran, is mostly because of all those dams that were built on rivers and dried up many aquifers. So on that side, and then if we want to talk about him as a human being, he had no regards for human rights unless he had to be loved by the Western governments and to be somebody that they would rely on him or to pay money for, let's say, the construction plans that he had. So that's why he opened the doors to journalists for a while, but very limited, and there was very limited freedom in the first 3 years of his 8-year presidency. But after that, everything was harshly censored, and many magazines, many newspapers were under a lot of pressure. So many people were interrogated during those years. I have bad memories from that time.
Bad memories from that time, but I want us to listen to a clip from later. This is Rafsanjani in 2010, a year after he had backed the losing side in those Green Movement protests that followed the re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as president.
Our laws are very transparent. If a law is written which goes against our main regulations, it will be considered void. We have to pay attention to this. God willing, we can proceed in such a way and not face further problems. We have to ensure we don't make targets of ourselves for our enemies, because they are already targeting us.
Because he backed the Green Movement against the hardliners.
I believe that. Look, first of all, I don't believe he was a moderate. He was a godfather with all the mafiosi descriptions that you want to talk about. Yes, Don Corleone was a moderate if you compared him with other godfathers. but he did it for his own interest because he needed to be in power. And he did not believe in freedom of speech. He did not believe in freedom of association. And under his presidency, so many people were assassinated, killed, tortured, and people who criticized him went to prison. I have talked to so many people, and I know so many people whose family members were murdered under his presidency. So I believe he served his own interests and his family's interests, and he needed the revolution or the Islamic Republic to continue staying on because he was, they called him the white shark, the great white shark, because he didn't have a beard, and in Iran they call somebody who doesn't have a beard a shark. But they called him the great white shark. The great white shark cannot swim in fresh water, so he needed salty water, and the revolutionary waters were salty.
Reza Marashi, is this how you remember him?
Well, I mean, I think eulogizing politicians is always kind of a futile task, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what they are. They're politicians. So rather than eulogizing somebody, I have a propensity to look at somebody's record when they're politicians. And there's no question that Rafsanjani's record is checkered. There's no doubt about that. There was some good, there was some bad. And depending on who you talk to, they might emphasize the good or the bad. And so when I sit back and think about Rafsanjani and the legacy that he left behind, I have a propensity to think of him as one of the pillars of the revolution. There were essentially a handful of Ayatollahs, maybe 5, 4, depending on who you talk to, not including Ayatollah Khamenei, that were really pillars that held this thing up, and he was one of them. So in that sense, as the Islamic Republic continues on into 2017, I think it's noteworthy that somebody that played an instrumental role in the creation and the survival of the current form of government in Iran passed away. But beyond that, I don't particularly find any interest in it one way or the other.
It's not going to leave a void in any respect.
So if you want to talk about the political dynamics, that's a whole other story. I mean, anytime you have these larger-than-life political figures in any country and they pass away or they get removed from the political scene one way or the other, there's always going to be a void that's left. But I think at the end of the day, politics continue, regardless of who passes away or regardless of who leaves the scene. And just like other political officials who were pillars of this revolution and the system that currently exists in Iran, Rafsanjani has left a legacy in terms of people who have come after him, people who were essentially his disciples. And one could make the case that President Rouhani is one of them. He's certainly his own man. He's not a carbon copy of Rafsanjani. In his later years, Rafsanjani took a lot of political bullets so that other political officials in the Islamic Republic didn't have to. But life goes on. Politics goes on. The train's not going to stop. And so I think as we move forward, it's going to be interesting to see how these politicians who were disciples of former President Rafsanjani move forward and continue on in their work.
Mohammad Morandi, listening there to Reza Marashi, there's the idea that perhaps we're making too much of the passing of Rafsanjani, and that well, the political system's already moved on, perhaps.
Well, first I'd like to point out that I believe that some of what one or two of your guests has said is more of a caricature of reality in Iran than reality itself. Mr. Rafsanjani obviously had his negative points as well in the eyes of many, those who believe that his liberal policies created a gap between the rich and poor. They have a case to make. And some may say that too many dams were built, but on the other hand, I think many would say that global warming, which is largely a creation of Europe and North America, would be the main culprit. And when one says that he had no regard for human rights, although I wouldn't consider myself to be a great fan of his or an opponent of his, but I would, be more careful because, for example, during the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein was given chemical weapons to use against Iranians, I survived 2 chemical attacks. Those were given by Saddam Hussein by European countries and the United States. So when we talk about human rights, we have to, I think, be careful what sort of context we're speaking in. Or when Obama drones people or supports extremists in Libya or Syria, one can say much more about such leaders. But I think that...
But let me ask you, Mohammad Moradi, because we're going to have to go to the break soon. Let me just ask you about the later Rafsanjani. You just heard Reza Marashi talking about him taking bullets, as he put it, for those that he defended.
Well, former President Rafsanjani, the late Mr. Rafsanjani, his alliances shifted. He saw himself as a centrist. And in the 1980s...
Oh dear, we seem to have lost the connection there. We've got you back. Mohammad Moradi? All right, we seem to have lost the connection. We'll try to patch that up with Tehran as quickly as possible. Nushabeh Amiri, are there several? Obviously, there were several Rafsanjanis. You said so yourself, between the one who was there before the revolution, and the one who was president, and the one of his later years. And let's focus on that last little bit.
Okay.
Is that Rafsanjani was he playing a key role?
Yes, he does, and he. I think that it was a very bad situation that the reformists and the Rouhani's group lost him, because from my point of view, he is just like a football team. He played just with one player. And now, for filling his place, we need lots of players. And nobody has got the same weight that he had. He was really the symbol of Islamic Republic. He had a very important role, and it wasn't as easy as that to get rid of him.
All right, we're going to look ahead to what's going to happen in the next 4 months in that presidential election that's coming up in part 2. You're watching the France 24 debate.